Welcome to the Essentially You podcast. Christine Garvin, how are you doing today, girl?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm so excited.
I am so excited. I get this question all the time. Women are just, there's so much concern and doubt and misinformation around fibroids. And we're going to be talking about not only how to deal with them naturally, but then when do we need to consider potential surgery or potentially other options, kind of less invasive options as well. So I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. I have been looking for you to bring onto the show for quite some time. Now, before we get into the nuts and bolts, I would love for you to share kind of that defining moment for you when you knew you wanted to start educating women about what's going on with their bodies, especially in perimenopause and menopause, dealing with fibroids.
Well, for me, it took a tragedy to really clarify, and I think this happens in a lot of women's lives, especially as we get into perimenopause and women start to feel differently than they ever have before, right? Some more and more women are dealing with menstrual issues throughout their, menstrual life, but really perimenopause can throw a lot of women for a loop. I wouldn't say that I knew that I was in perimenopause. And what was interesting was that, I had done training in holistic health education and nutrition in my 20s, and I did that work for a while. And then I had always been a dancer. And so I got into teaching dance full time and performing and everything. And I won't go into the whole long story of how I figured out that I had a fibroid, but just, to say it was shocking. And I actually found it myself because I could not get my Diva Cup all the way in 1 month, right? Mm-hmm. And so I kind of felt up in there and was like, okay, there's something in here that, wasn't here before. And this is something that I think women face. And I talk to clients about this all the time. If you think something is off about your body, you got to go to your doctor and you got to demand and you got to say, I know something's off, because I went to just get it checked out at first and I couldn't see my doctor right away. So I saw another one and she tried to convince me it was my cervix that I was feeling. And I was like, nope, I know it's not my cervix, and she wasn't unkind, right? She wasn't unkind about it, but I was just like, yeah, this wasn't there before. And then obviously through an ultrasound, we found out that I had one that was about 6 centimeters at the time. So for those that don't know much about fibroids, that's relatively big. It's definitely been hanging out growing for a little while if it's 6 centimeters. A lot of women will find out maybe when it's maybe 1 or 2 or 3 centimeters. So for me, it was causing excessive bleeding during my period. Like I went from, pretty normal bleeding to filling up a Diva Cup in an hour. And then it also the location of it, it was kind of a joke in my dance classes because we were saying I was growing a tail because it actually was located to where it was pushing out my coccyx bone, so at the end of my spine. So, that's one thing that I want women to understand too, is that it can misplace things in your reproductive area and cause issues. And that's where you start to see women, being in a lot of pain. So found out I had the fibroid and then immediately dived into trying to figure out, well, what can I do about this? What can I do to naturally shrink it? And everything that I read said, oh, once you get over 5 centimeters, you can't really shrink it. I ended up talking to probably about 10 or 15 women that did what's called a myomectomy, which is, when they go in and they remove just the fibroid or the fibroids so that you can maintain your uterus, keep, all your reproductive organs. And for me, that was really important. Even though I don't want children, I really wanted to keep, my reproductive organs. And so I talked to a lot of women that it went fantastically well and it, changed their lives. So I decided to go down that path. And after I had my surgery, which was just I did have to stay overnight, with hysterectomies, often they're just outpatient surgeries, which is crazy to me, especially after what I've gone through.
And would it potentially be because I know that hysterectomies are the second most common surgery for women. The first most common surgery for women is birth. And because birth is a quite invasive process, whether doctors or however we kind of label it as a culture. And I wonder it's because we just do so many hysterectomies that they've got that down to a science.
They feel like they have it down to a
Well,
science,
yes.
for sure.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's easy. Yeah. There's like,
Yep.
we could take this all out real quick.
Totally.
Don't worry about it.
We
We
got
got
it.
you.
We just go in there, snip, and it's very tragic to me. I
It's
mean, I
awful.
understand
Yeah.
the motivation to get women moving after surgery, like just surgeries in general, having people move and blood flow and all that kind of stuff is good. But to actually just have them in and out in a day is crazy to me, and I'll explain why in a moment. But mine was overnight, and the next morning, I'll just say that, I kind of knew something was wrong, but I didn't know what. And within 2 weeks, I had so much pain, I could barely get out of bed. I was calling the nurses, where I'd gotten the fibroid removed at the premier hospital in the Southeast for minimally invasive gynecological surgeries, right? So this wasn't just like a little podunk place that I went to get this done, right? And they kind of pushed me off and said, oh, like maybe we'll try this other pain medication, or, oh, scar tissue is just forming. Turned out that I had a massive infection, massive abscess, and I had sepsis at that point because
Goodness.
I had been burned in 3 places in my intestines during that minimally invasive myomectomy. And, this is going back to the point of like having women go in and out. I mean, it's crazy to me because what happened to me is a little extreme. I haven't actually found anyone else that's been, burned in 3 places in their intestines. But I know a lot of women now that are nicked during gynecological surgeries, and I ended up losing half of my colon and about 8 inches of my small intestine. I lost my appendix, everything in that area is gone. And I had to have an ostomy bag for 6 months to let my intestines heal. And during that time, I got in ostomy support groups, and I realized how often women end up with ostomy bags because of gynecological surgeries.
Mm.
So it's a big thing, and it's not talked about enough at all. It's not talked about as a possibility when you go in for these, simple, quote unquote, simple surgeries.
Can you speak to me, because I know you've had the opportunity, and as have I, talking to women post-surgery, gynecological surgeries, there's lots of different ones depending on what women are going through.
Mm-hmm.
How often post-surgery, or even before they get there, that inherently something isn't right? What is the propensity of women not being listened to?
I mean, I couldn't even imagine to try and qualify how many. That's the case most of the time, I believe. In our culture, women's pain is not taken seriously. We're thought of as over emotional. We know that if you're a woman of color, that's even worse,
Mm-hmm.
that you don't get listened to. I mean, I had a story with a colleague where she was left in the ER for 8 hours. It turned out that she had a burst ovarian cyst. And those can be, I mean, life-threatening.
Extremely painful, yeah.
Yeah, extremely painful and life-threatening. And, no doubt because of the color of her skin, and so it's so deep for women. And what I tell women all the time now, if you think even a tiny thing is wrong with you, and I know how it is to be in the place where I was in pain. I didn't want to fight for myself or advocate for myself, but just drop the word sepsis, because that seems to be the key of getting doctors' attention. Say, especially, don't wait longer than 3 days if you have anything happen post-surgery, because that's really when things start to take a turn for the worse, and I was lucky because, again, it was 2 weeks in between my surgery and me ending up in the ER. And, they couldn't believe I wasn't in septic shock at that point, because, bacteria and stool and everything was just dumping into my abdominal cavity and filling that up. So yeah, that's one of the big things with women. I just say, bring up sepsis right off the bat, because usually that's going to trigger something different than just saying, oh, I feel pain, because they can just brush that off.
Absolutely. We know historically and even today that, yeah, the whole concept of pain and women in pain is just not well believed. I've seen it a lot in endometriosis. It seems that
Mm-hmm.
the only time where we really care about women with endometriosis is when infertility is a concern.
Absolutely.
And so I'm so glad you're not only from personal experience speaking to this, but then also, we know the research is there, but then we've seen so many other women experience, different surgeries, but still it taking forever to get that surgery approved, and then post-surgery, us also not being listened to on the other side of things.
Yeah, it's such I have to laugh at it sometimes because I know women who are in their, late 20s or early 30s, and they've just had tons of issues, with their reproductive system for a long time. And although I don't necessarily want for them to have a hysterectomy, I know that in some cases that is the better choice. And they will not get it because doctors are telling them, oh, you're too young, you're going to want to have kids. It's always putting that down. Even if they say, well, I don't want to have children, it's like, well, no, you're going to want to, right? It's that sort of
It's
patriarchal
what it's supposed to be.
approach, right? And then on the other side of it, when you're in your 40s or 50s, they have to fight for the hysterectomy, they're just giving out the hysterectomies left and right, excuse me. And so it's so funny because it all does come back to, I think, this idea that women our purpose is to give children, have children, and beyond that, like, our reproductive system makes no difference.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm so glad that's why I'm so happy to be having this conversation. Not to say because by any means does any of this, it just enrages me. Many times I hear these stories, but I know that we need to be speaking up about it because a lot of women, we go silent on it. We're not having these
Absolutely.
conversations.
Absolutely. And it's interesting. I interviewed Kelly Garza, who is a steamy chick, if any of you guys have heard of her, and she educates about vaginal steaming, and we were talking about the stories that come in of women just not being listened to, particularly post-surgery, when it's so, so important to be listened to because of what happened to me, what happens so often. And, I think getting these stories out there in a big way so people can understand how much this happens, and that, I hate to say this, but for the most part, the doctors are not held accountable. And, I was in the place where I wasn't interested in ruining my doctor's life. I know she didn't do it on purpose, but there was nothing around, it being, held up or saying, okay, we messed up or anything like that,
Right. There
and
was no recourse for
no,
the damage that had happened to you due
no.
to her burning 3 different areas of your intestines.
Yeah.
And then not listening to, and I don't know if she knew or didn't know that she did it, right? We don't know. Probably
Yeah.
more than I do. And yet there was no like follow up or
Yeah.
when you were wondering of, oh, I wonder if that had anything to do with how I messed that up.
Right. Well, it's interesting because the ER docs ended up calling her when I was in the hospital because they knew that, obviously that I just had this surgery done. And so, she found out what was happening with me, but it was that frustration of like, okay, it had to get to that point where I was literally dying of sepsis, for there to be this thing. And again, I'll never know exactly what happened. My OBGYN, she has the best theory that I've heard, which is that sparks flew off the tool because it's a heated tool that cuts up the fibroid.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes sense to me in terms of one of the burns was up on my transverse colon, which is, for people that don't know, at the top of your colon that goes across, and where the incision had been was down near the bottom of my ascending colon and where the small intestine connects, and I had 2 burns down there, but then I had that one up top. And so the spark flying sort of makes the most sense, but we'll never know, and unfortunately, in most cases, women don't get any compensation or anything from this happening. And, not only did I have an ostomy bag for 6 months, it could have gone worse. I could have had an ostomy bag for the rest of my life. I was actually really lucky that I was able to get a reversal, but I'll still never fully be the same.
I was going to say, I wanted to just speak into that. I can't imagine, with a big chunk of your small intestines, large intestines, your appendix all out, and as much as they do their best to repair, can't imagine it's ever felt completely normal for you.
Yeah, I feel lucky having the training that I do in order to work on my gut health.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll be rebuilding my gut for a long time. But because of what I know, I've been able to do more than I think a lot of people that would have been in my situation would have known to do. And I feel bad about that too. I try and support, people with ostomies for whatever reason on rebuilding gut health, because it's so, so important. We know for our hormones, for everything,
Yeah,
right? Like it's like,
absolutely.
if I don't want more fibroids growing, then I definitely got to like be focusing on my gut health. And so, but still, I mean, I will always have tons of scar tissue, you know, even with everything that I've done. I'll have pains there. I've been able to rebuild my core pretty well after time, you know, which is pelvic floor therapy. I
Mm-hmm.
highly recommend for women for everything.
For everything.
Yeah, like everything. Like there's no reason that every woman shouldn't go to pelvic floor therapist at some point, but she helped me rebuild my core safely. But you know, yeah, I mean, they had to cut right down the middle of my body, you know, and they couldn't sew me back up because of the sepsis. So I just healed with a wound back on, and so everything's changed, not just outside scars, but internally.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing your
Sure.
story. Thank you so much for giving us kind of a window into what that looks like,
Mm-hmm.
and what it looks like. Even I don't know when this procedure was. When was this for you?
It was almost 2 years ago.
2 years
June
ago.
22nd will be 2 years. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'm really just kind of, I'd say, coming to the other side of
I
things.
was going to say, yeah, 2
Yeah.
years is not that long.
Yeah.
Mm.
And my reversal surgery was just about a year and a couple months ago. So, you know, it was definitely a process. I ended up having 4 surgeries because of one, minimally invasive one, you know. So, yeah.
Mm.
So, you know, fibroids can create some havoc on, you know, wreak some havoc for women. And that's why it's really important for me to share what we can do, not just for fibroids, but our overall hormonal health, right? Because we know it's an issue with hormones when we have fibroids.
Absolutely. Let's steer the conversation into fibroids. I
Okay.
just finished my manuscript, wrote a
Mm.
manuscript. I just finished a book on perimenopause and menopause, and there's an entire chapter devoted to this topic. And because most of us, a good like 80+% of us
Yep.
will have fibroids
Yep.
before is it 50 years old or?
Yep, 50. Yep. So it's estimated that 80% of women and up to 90% of African American women will have them. And for people that don't know what fibroids are, they're, you know, benign or non-cancerous tumors, but they grow like tumors want to grow. And, you know, it comes from the smooth muscle and connective tissue of the uterus, and they can be found inside of the uterus or outside of the uterus, or actually halfway in between and halfway out. So the location of them will sort of dictate the symptoms that women will have with them. And, you know, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, can you speak a little bit to when it comes to location? And I know I spent some time doing the research here, because oftentimes there's that women may not even notice they have them.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely. Yeah.
again, depending on location
Yep,
and where they're
absolutely.
growing. But
Yep.
then there are definitely fibroids that, will start to cause some pretty serious heavy bleeding or even pain and
Mm-hmm.
discomfort.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So often, you know, if they're small enough and they're kind of like tucked in the uterus,
Mhm.
women won't feel them. They're just there. And you know, that 80 to 90% of women that will have them, a lot won't ever know that they have them because they show up, I guess, at any age, but it become much more common to show up in perimenopause because of the fluctuations in our hormones that start at that point, right? So
Yeah.
as you well know, I mean, I'm sure your listeners know that, you know, our progesterone starts to go down. And for me, I was 38 when I found out I had the fibroid. And that was kind of over time, I learned, you know, I think a lot of times we think, oh, perimenopause doesn't start until 45 or
Oh,
46.
I wish.
You know, right? It's like good story. But really, for a lot of women, their late 30s is when
Mhm.
this fluctuation. And, you know, I still had a quote unquote regular cycle, even though it was becoming like crazy, like a crime scene. But it's really with the progesterone starting to shift and then the estrogen. And I think this is such an important thing. And, you know, I'm sure you talk a lot about this in your book, but like dialing in your estrogen levels
Mm.
is just so important, and understanding. I wish I had known about hormone testing, you know, like I don't want to say real hormone testing, because not to say the blood hormone testing, but you have to fight for blood hormone testing anyway.
Anyway, to
Yeah,
begin with.
exactly. And that just gives you a snapshot that can be helpful, but it doesn't really tell you the whole story, right? And it doesn't really help you get clarity of what you should do. So, something like the Dutch test is super helpful. I mean, salivary testing is great too, but I love the Dutch because we see how the estrogen is
Metabolizing.
metabolizing.
Yeah.
Exactly. And if I had known that before this, I know that I could have made a huge difference in the growth or diminishment of my fibroid, because when I took that test after, and my estradiol was through the roof, and I was definitely pushing down the 4-OH pathway, which is the more carcinogenic pathway for those.
Yeah, I was wondering if you were also pushing out the OH16.
I actually wasn't, which was interesting, but and the reason that that's interesting is because often that's connected to fibroids.
Yeah, the proliferative.
Yep, exactly. But I'm also guessing, so I took the Dutch probably a year after my surgery. And so I had lost so much weight during my surgery. I was down to 91 pounds. I lost my cycle for, a solid 4 months. So I'm sure that my estrogen shifted all around during that time. So my guess is if I had taken it before my fibroid surgery, the 16-OH probably would have been more, it was going down that pathway more at that point. But it was super helpful to know how much it was going down the 4-OH, and what
absolutely
about that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, we speak a lot to estrogen dominance. We speak a lot to liver detoxification pathways here. I find women 35 and older is when we start to see an uptick of more estrogen in the system in relation to progesterone, and for a number of reasons, not just because progesterone is that first little hormone to start to move on down, but also stress is playing a role, and trauma is playing a role, and gut health is playing a role. All of those things are playing a role in kind of siphoning off our progesterone. So I find that we start to see, issues of estrogen dominance a lot earlier than we would anticipate.
Yeah. And I think that's, speaks to the world that we live in now, right? And the lives that women lead. And I get it. And I fully, for me, believe that liver and stress were the two main pushers, because I did have a really good diet and I did take care of my gut really well, because I had gone through, I'd say, my first health crisis after college, where I'd been on 3 rounds of antibiotics for strep throat in college, and that just decimated, my good bacteria, and I had no idea at the time. So I spent a lot of my 20s and 30s really rebuilding my gut. So really, it's interesting because I actually had, and I'm very in tune with my body. So, I mean, my friends laugh at me because it's every little thing I'm like, what's going on? They're
so
calm down.
Women are taught to not listen to their intuition and their gut instincts, and to be so in tune with your body, I think is such a big win. But yeah, I'm sure other people, because again, we normalize kind of us just following the rules, or us just kind of going with the flow of things, opposed to really touching into that intuition.
Absolutely.
That's what this whole podcast is about, is how do we take ownership of our health, when for many years, I remember growing up with my mom and my grandma, my grandmother, they just giving away their health to their doctors.
Absolutely.
Not really touching into that inner pilot light.
Absolutely. And I think, it's a practice for sure, but once you start doing it and you do it for a little while, you can't turn it off. That light is blinking at you, right? So
always blinking at you.
Yeah, you're like, turn it off. But for me, I actually had pains in my liver at different points before all of this happened. And so now I really understand. I didn't understand at the time just how important, and I haven't taken a genetic test, but my guess is I have some SNPs and some issues when it comes to detox.
Like a COMT gene mutation or something like that. And women in particular, and especially for women, we just our livers are burdened, and no one tells us to pay attention to the liver. Everyone's just like, oh, the liver's she's doing what she needs to do. I'm like, no, she needs help.
She needs help. She needs support every day.
Daily help.
Yeah.
So we talk a lot about loving our liver every day, because a lot of people, they don't connect the dots, especially when we start to see thyroid issues. I'm like, ooh, we got to look at that liver. What's going on with those conversions from T4 to T3?
Yes. And, going back to bringing in the stress component of it, we know that stress impacts our liver. If you look at traditional Chinese medicine. Anger is stored in our liver. So much of, women, to keep everything together, we have to push stuff down, and our poor liver has to deal with that, along with the xenoestrogens that are in our environment. And this is a big thing that I had to get educated on, and a lot of my clients, I really have to point out that I think it's kind of known, oh, plastic's not great, BPA, we don't want that, but we don't actually understand how many chemicals are in our environment every day all around us, right? The things that we use in our hair, on our face, in our furniture, it's everywhere. It's insidious. And to really support your liver to be able to deal with that, on top of, the other things that you're putting into your body that your liver has to get out. And this is me just theorizing. There is one study that I found, I think it was like a 2009 study, around heavy metal toxicity, or heavy metals and fibroids. But I think that there's a deeper link between that and fibroids than we currently know. But in that study, they did find a connection. It's not necessarily the all be end all, but I think that that's something that women should pay attention to also, along with all the other things that they're doing.
I absolutely agree. And I'd love for you to speak to, there was a lot that we can speak to on the liver. And I, like I said, we do have several dedicated episodes just connecting the dots to estrogen dominance and fibroids or heavy bleeding, the types of symptoms that we should be looking out for. But I would love to speak a little bit into gut health as well, because I think we're beginning to see that it's all interconnected. I think we're beginning to see that what happens in our gut is absolutely going to impact what happens within our hormones, especially our menstrual cycle, and here in a world where women are finally just barely learning to track their menstrual cycle as a vital sign. And for many women, that being like brand new news. No one ever told them to do anything like that. Like, they say, what? I thought I was just supposed to curse when my period showed up. Like, that was the extent of it. Right. So definitely a lot of things are shifting, and we see earlier, younger generations really getting educated, a different type of education, even that I grew up with. Like, you don't like your period, you don't like your cycle, then take the pill. Like, that was the cure-all for me growing up. And so much has changed. But speak to me, I know a lot of us are struggling with our digestive health, our gut health. Could you speak to me? We touched a little bit about the liver and what we can do there, how we can lessen toxins, we can manage stress, lessen our sugar intake as well. And stress absolutely co-elevates insulin there as well. But talk to me a little bit about how you have gone to do extensive repair on your gut post-surgery, and even post when you were in college and you had the 3 separate antibiotic treatments that you had to overcome or do due to the strep throat that you were dealing with.
Well, I've done a lot of things, for
I'm
sure. But I find at this point for myself and in my training, since then, and also for my clients, like, you got to work from the upper GI down. Right. And so first and foremost, I will ask people all the time, how's your digestion? I will get the answer, it's fine. I'll say, do you have gas and bloating? Well, yeah. Okay, it's not fine.
Absolutely. What woman doesn't have gas and bloating?
Right. And I'm like, I get that it feels normal because it's common, but that doesn't mean that it's normal. And so let's talk about what's going on in your upper GI. So that can mean something as simple as you need to start stimulating your hydrochloric acid, because it's just not, there's different reasons I can go into in a moment that may not be working as well. But one of those is, as we age, we just produce less HCl, right?
Yep.
And not only do we need that to break down our food properly and to trigger the next stages in our digestion, but it also kills off bacteria that is coming into our body that wants to take over and weed up our beautiful garden of our intestines. So, getting that HCl up, so whether that's using bitters or, apple cider vinegar works for some people, try that first. And let me put a little footnote to that. If you have acid reflux or heartburn, don't do those things first. Start with healing up the mucosal lining of both your stomach and your esophagus, and using things like deglycerinated licorice and things like that, marshmallow root, that to help heal that and really get that under control before you start trying to stimulate the HCl.
Yeah, but once that's going, those epithelial cells even more.
Right, right, exactly. We don't want to damage things more, but we do want your HCl to go up because, contrary to popular belief, it's not too high of HCl issue going on. It's too low of HCl issue going on, and things just get wrecked if that's going on. So we want to up that. We want to usually support with some digestive enzymes while you're, upping your digestion. And, I mean, for me, I'll be taking HCl and digestive enzymes for the rest of
Me
my
too.
life.
Always.
Yeah. I mean, there's just no way around it. Some people, I think, can heal to the point where they don't need it. But I'd say for the majority of people, just kind of bank on that being part of your, your arsenal that you use on a consistent basis, because it makes a huge difference.
I agree. And I think some people always ask, well, how long do I need to do this? I'm like, forever.
Yeah. Let me just be blunt here. It's for the long haul.
Would you like your gut to stay healthy?
Yeah.
Then we're going to need to be consistent.
Yeah. Maybe if we lived in 1,000 years ago with our clean water and our food from the earth.
A serious amount of vegetables and fruits to get raw enzymes all the time. When the average adult is consuming 1.5 fruits and vegetables, and in that category is fried potatoes and ketchup, we definitely need some support on the digestive enzyme front.
Absolutely. Ding, ding, ding. Yeah. So once you've got that in play, as a basic for pretty much everyone, check in with how your gallbladder is doing. Like, are you absorbing your fats well? And a lot of times you can tell by, do you have greasy stools? If you have greasy stools, you're probably not absorbing your fats very well. So give that gallbladder support, because you're really supporting your liver in the process of that too, and a great food for the gallbladder is beets. So I like to include them in, I have a NutriBullet, and I'll just mix a bunch of vegetables and maybe some unsweetened oat milk or something in there. And that's an easy way to get them in. If you like
beets are great in smoothies. And if you don't like the taste of beets, they just disappear.
Exactly. It's sneaky in there, Yeah. And then there's also supplements. There's also supplements if people are really, really against beets, but that's a good start. And then of course, you can never, look past the microbiome. That is, I think, the epicenter of all of this stuff, right? It's the epicenter of our gut health. It's the epicenter of our hormones in a lot of ways. It's the epicenter of our mental happiness, or I can't think of what word I want to use right now.
Yeah, our emotional well-being.
Yes,
it could be anxiousness that we're experiencing. A lot of that stems from the gut.
Yep. And I actually just noted this the other day that, given obviously I had a lot of PTSD after my surgeries, but it took a little while for me to really bring back in some of the quality probiotics. And it was a little tough while I had the ostomy, because I didn't have access to my colon, right? And so you're kind of like, is this good or bad? Because you don't know if you want the good bacteria sitting in your small intestine, because that could create SIBO. So there was a little bit of touch and go there. But once I was reconnected after a few months, my anxiety started going down tremendously. And I have no doubt it's because I was actually getting that good flora back into my system. And so for me, that was a very key, oh yes, this really does impact us. We kind of talked about it, but this really does impact us on this mental level.
Oh, absolutely. It's the, the gut and brain are so interconnected, and it's hard for us to feel that or know that when we've been told other things for so long. But in a situation like yourself, where you absolutely can the physical manifestation of what's happening to you is showing up in, not to say, the PTSD had to be so real, but also that anxiousness that we can feel when our gut is not happy.
Absolutely. It was, my anxiety levels were high. I couldn't turn it off at all. Right. And then that, of course, is impacting your adrenals, which is the other aspect that we can get here to in a second. But it's just it's all interconnected. And, the last part about the gut and the microbiome that I think is so important, and I know that you speak to this too, is, getting that estrogen out of your body. Right. So your liver does the hard work. You got to poop it out. Exactly. You got to make sure it's connected in there and moving out of your body, right? Your liver does the hard work of stabilizing it and taking it from being a toxin and making it water soluble, and then it goes into your gut. And if you're a strobolome,
phase 3, it's equally as important of a phase as the liver.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of people don't understand that element of how your gut and your estrogen in particular, but all your hormones are connected. It's so important to move those hormones that we're done with out of our body, especially estrogen, because of estrogen dominant situations.
I love, yeah, or we end up recirculating it
Yep.
literally back, and then we overburden the liver. It becomes a
Again.
really nasty cycle. Yeah, and
Yeah.
your liver's just like, wait, didn't I just
Right.
do that?
Haven't I seen you before?
Do I have to really break this down again? Absolutely. It
Yeah.
becomes a really nasty mess. Yeah, your liver could be running like a fine-tuned machine. You could have dialed that in.
Yeah.
But if you haven't dialed in your gut, you're just going to find yourself recirculating a lot of those
Yep.
toxins back to the system.
Yep. Absolutely.
I'm so
Whew.
glad you're spending time with us on this. I know people are like, where are the fibroids? I'm like, it's all good. I promise we're having this conversation because these are the things that are going to keep you from potentially developing, big fibroids or maybe even
Yep.
fibroids at all. We know that the reason why fibroids, they're not coming out of nowhere for no
Yeah.
reason.
Yep.
For us as women. And yes, it's not fair that for some reason progesterone decides, that our
I know.
bodies are designed in a way that progesterone, which is our biggest balancer for
Mm-hmm.
a potentially unopposed estrogen, which we know is a growth hormone,
Mm-hmm.
that it begins to start to drop. And for most women, unfortunately, what I see time and time again, there's a lot of other ways that we unfortunately lose our progesterone levels.
Yeah.
And so we may start to see this earlier on in our, for me, the first time that I had major progesterone drops, significantly low progesterone was in my late 20s, early 30s.
Oh,
And I
yeah.
knew then that it was always going to be something I had to keep my eye on, because if it was a problem then, it was definitely going to continue to be a concern if I didn't clean up my lifestyle.
Right. And I mean, think about how many women that's probably true for that don't even know it, right? Because extreme PMS symptoms are usually pointing to a progesterone deficiency on
Mhm.
some level, or too much estrogen going on, and women will get on birth control because that's what their doctors tell them to do to deal with those symptoms, right? So I have no doubt that I probably had estrogen dominance kind of going on for probably since I was a teenager, and those cramps started really bad when I was about age 12, and it's like, to know these things, and to go back to what you were saying about, people are like, talk about fibroids, like, this is it, this is the stuff to actually stave off fibroids, to diminish fibroids. There's no, people ask me all the time, well, what can I take? And there's no one thing you can take to not have fibroids. You have to work on your gut, you have to work on your liver, and you have to work on your stress levels. And I absolutely believe, because of all the things that we face and all of the stress that we deal with, and menstrual issues starting so young for so many women, it's a buildup, right? So that's why you see things go so wacky even younger than we've ever really known before,
It's
and
beginning to add up much
yeah,
faster.
yeah. And the trauma component is another thing that I really like to speak to, because not just like actual trauma, but emotional and spiritual trauma,
Mhm.
and I think are a big part of fibroids. For me, I had continued to push myself in work that needed to be done. And I knew that on a deep level, that I was done with that work and that I needed to move into this different direction. But I kept not doing it for all the reasons that we don't, right? We fear trying to jump into something different. We fear for our safety. We fear all of these different things. And it's like that compounded with the stress of trying to push, just doing something that I no longer had a love for, and like putting all these hours into it. It was just like my body was like, all right, you're not listening to me, so I'm going to make you listen to me. I tell women all the time, like, really take stock. Like, if you have fibroids or ovarian cysts or any of these kinds of growths, I think that they're a real signal to us to start to be really honest, be kind, but honest with ourselves about where we are in our lives, what we want to be doing in our lives. Are we doing I don't believe we all have necessarily just this one soul's calling, but I do believe each of us have, this purpose or purposes of what we should be following. And our bodies are signals for that if we're not doing that. And then if you have trauma, which all of us do, but particularly with everything that's going on in the world right now, we really see like the trauma, the generational trauma, the genetic trauma that's passed down from generations. I mean, women, we have it deep. Black women have it even deeper. And so we have to really work with that, work with a professional that you really trust, to get through that kind of stuff. Because I do think that our reproductive system is always listening, and it's a barometer, right? It's a
It
barometer
is.
of our physical, emotional, and spiritual health.
I agree,
Yeah.
100%. Absolutely. Checking in and seeing if the things in your life are making you happy, if they're serving you, if they're not serving you, is the job serving you? I mean, we just got to go a little bit deeper and
Mhm.
see, what is our body trying to tell us at that
Mhm.
time. And I know
Mhm.
that's not always easy to switch and change what we're doing.
Oh,
And
no.
so many of us are caught up in obligations of family and taking
Mm.
care of our kids or taking care of parents. I know that it can become more complicated, but finding ways in which that you're focusing on things that you love as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And, for me, such a big lesson was boundaries. And that can show up in all parts of our lives, right? And I think in general, as women, we struggle with setting boundaries because we've been taught to give, and give some more. And then now we're in a culture that's like, oh, yeah, take care of yourself by like drinking wine or getting a pedicure. And there's nothing wrong with those things, but that's not gonna save you, right? That's not true self-care. True self-care is setting these boundaries in your life. And like you just said, like sometimes that's not possible. Like my dad was in the hospital in January in a kind of emergency surgery situation, and I had to go be in the hospital, and I had to be the advocate because things
Yeah.
weren't great.
Mm-mm.
And it sucked. I mean, I didn't want to have to do it, but I still had to create, even in that situation, some boundaries because I knew I was like, I can't push my body past its limits anymore. That's my biggest lesson from everything that I went through. Like, I have to respect my body, respect its boundaries above all else, honestly.
I love that. I'm so grateful you're saying that today because, yeah, and we can point to the spiritual connection between not having boundaries and what that ultimately ends up leading for us, whether it's fibroids or maybe it's endo or, definitely some type of exacerbation that shows up in the body. Mhm.
Absolutely. Yeah. I also understand, women don't always necessarily, not only do they not feel like they have the time, they're, may not have the money and all those things. And I get it, and I also understand that once you start making yourself a priority on those levels, like really start making it, you'll find ways. You'll definitely find ways, and I'm here to support women in trying to figure that out, absolutely, because we need help in this process. But it's key. If you don't want, and if you've had surgery done to get your fibroids removed and it wasn't a hysterectomy, you're going to have to do something to not have those fibroids grow back,
Yeah, let's speak into that because I know that surgery isn't always a bad idea. We definitely always want to explore as many natural options as possible
Mm-hmm.
and definitely more non-invasive options as well. But
Mm-hmm.
let's just say we get to a point where, surgery is on the table, whether it's a myomectomy or I know that there's lots of other newer treatments as well that are available just coming on the scene.
Mm-hmm.
But I know that that doesn't mean that fibroids aren't going to come back.
Right, absolutely. That's the thing. And so, yeah, there's uterine embolization is another option that it kind of cuts off the blood flow to the fibroids. And I've seen it work for some women and then not so much for others,
Yeah, I've read a lot that not always so much for a lot of for women.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I'd say like 50% of the time it seems to help somewhat, and that does, sometimes it shrinks a little bit, sometimes it just doesn't get bigger, but often they'll end up doing a myomectomy or a hysterectomy eventually. I don't know a whole lot about the Accessa, which is a
The
newer,
newest, yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
and
I know it's out of Texas and it's kind of going into other states now. I have a friend
yeah,
of mine who's a gynecologist who he is doing those procedures.
okay.
And so I've talked to him a little bit about it and he has done a ton of myomectomies over the years and
Hmm.
not a big fan of uterine embolization.
Hmm.
But so far he's really liked that it's been one of the most non-invasive approaches, but most doctors are not trained on it and it's not
Yeah,
always the best option.
right.
So
And I know it uses like radio
mhm.
frequencies. I'm unsure if that includes heat or not in that, And so my perspective always when people ask me about those things, and I need to find out if it includes heat, but heat is what did it to me,
Mhm.
So
You're like,
I,
ugh.
it could, I'm not, I, I don't know. And so I'm
I'm
always
pretty
wary.
sure it includes heat.
Yeah.
My
Yeah.
gut is telling me based on my conversations. Yeah.
Yeah. And so just be aware that the same kinds of things could happen. Again, it's not likely that exactly what happened to me is going to happen to somebody else, but just be really, really cognizant and aware of your body if you do any of these things, and I get it. If you have a 20 centimeter fibroid that is pushing on your bladder,
causing
makes you look
incontinence.
making exactly incontinence, like that's scary, right? And then like making you look pregnant because that's what it can do. I get it. Like you want to get that thing out of your body, or you want to bring it down in whatever way you can. And so I often tell women, I'm honest with them, because once it gets to a certain size, it's not easy to shrink them. Once it gets, say, 10 centimeters or larger, I know some women that have, but it's harder. But, if it's not causing you extreme pain, can you give it 6 months to really work on the, hormonal aspects that we've talked about, and really get clear on how your estrogen's doing, get clear on how your progesterone is doing, get some bioidentical progesterone in your life if that's like what's needed, really making sure your liver is supported, because there is some shrinkage that can definitely happen, and then if in 6 months that doesn't work and you still feel like you need to get it out, you can do it then. Again, some women are going to need, they've been living with it for a long time, and they got to get it out, and I understand that. I would never tell any woman to not get surgery. And I have women contact me all the time because they'll read my story and they're like, oh my God, I'm signed up for surgery tomorrow, and I just read your story. And I was like, oh, not good timing, and I just say, go in with the belief that this is going to be amazing and really help you. Don't take any of this that you've just read about my situation in with you as much as you possibly can.
I love that advice. Absolutely. Christine, honey, you have given us so much to not only consider and really to look into what I call the root cause of what's going on with us and what we can be looking at deeper. How can we plug more into you?
So you can find me at my website, and that's christinegarvin.com. That's a great place to sort of see all the different things going on. I also have a podcast, which I'm excited to have you on.
Yay, yes.
And that's called Hormonally Speaking. And I'm so lucky to talk to such amazing, women. It's incredible right now, the growth of this sector, industry, or whatever, and how many awesome, amazing women are out there sharing this information so that we have different choices. You can find me on Instagram at Christine Garvin. Those are best places to kind of tap in.
Love it. Well, thank you so much. Not only thank you for sharing your story today, but thank you for sharing, kind of what our journeys can look like and what we can do to shift those journeys, what we can do to do things naturally, and really giving us permission to really touch in with our intuition, like listening to what our bodies need most and listening to the signals that our bodies are telling us. And what deeper message could that be?
Absolutely. Glad to do it.
Yeah. Thank you for coming on. It was such a pleasure.
Thanks for having me. Bye.